When a man crosses 40, something inside him begins to whisper, softly at first, then louder with every passing year. It's not the voice of madness, but the voice of reflection, of loss, of time, slipping like sand through tired hands. He looks around at the life he built, the house, the family, the career, and for a brief moment, it feels like someone else's story. Everything he once chased so desperately now feels strangely quiet. The trophies don't speak anymore. The laughter at dinner fades quicker. Even his own reflection feels like an old photograph, familiar but distant. I've seen it in men who once seemed unshakable, the ones who led teams, raised families, made every decision with confidence. But one morning, they wake up and realize they've been running on autopilot for years. The energy that once pushed them forward turns inward, questioning, doubting, aching. It's not insanity. It's a deep, unspoken crisis, the kind that psychologists call midlife transition. But in reality, it feels more like a quiet storm inside the soul. And here's the truth no one likes to say out loud. Some men don't survive it. They spiral. They break things that once held meaning, their families, their marriages, their peace. They chase younger women, buy cars they don't need, quit jobs that once defined them. On the surface, it looks like madness, but beneath it, it's a desperate attempt to feel alive again, to reclaim a part of themselves that got buried under responsibility and routine. Why does it happen? Why do men who seem stable, loving, and mature suddenly become strangers to their own families? It's not because they stop loving. It's because they start searching for themselves, often in the wrong places. Psychologists describe this as the existential pivot, when a man confronts the question he's been avoiding his whole life. Is this really who I am? And when that question arrives at 40, it doesn't knock politely, it kicks the door open. But here's the painful paradox. While he's trying to find himself, he often loses the people who love him most. The wife who stood by him feels replaced by his restlessness. The children see confusion instead of guidance. Friends drift away because they don't know how to help. And the man, caught between who he was and who he might become, begins to unravel. This story isn't about judgment, it's about understanding, because beneath the chaos lies something profoundly human, the fear of fading, of being forgotten, of realizing that time is not infinite. And that fear, when left unspoken, becomes the spark that burns everything he built. I've often thought that turning 40 feels less like a birthday and more like crossing an invisible border, a point where youth is no longer chasing you from behind, and the horizon ahead looks strangely still. The noise of ambition fades, the adrenaline of survival slows, and for the first time in decades, silence enters the room. And in that silence, a man begins to hear everything he's been ignoring. His regrets, his unmet dreams, his fading vitality, and the haunting question, is this all there is? It's the age when life feels both full and empty. You've achieved things. Yes, you've played your role, the provider, the father, the husband, the dependable one. You've carried the weight so long that it became a part of your identity. But at 40, that identity starts to crack. You begin to realize that the world doesn't see your sacrifices, it only sees your performance. The applause has quieted. The people you built your life around have their own worlds now, and you, the man who gave everything, start to feel invisible. I remember sitting across from a friend once, a good man, devoted father, successful architect. He stared at his coffee for a long time and said, "I don't feel like me anymore. I look in the mirror and it's like someone else's life." His wife thought he was depressed. His therapist said it was stress. But what he was really describing was the fracture between the man he was supposed to be and the man he wanted to be. That fracture is where many men begin to lose themselves. Psychologists call this the midlife identity crisis. But it's more than that. It's an existential awakening that arrives without invitation. Men spend their 20s and 30s building careers, families, reputations, but they rarely build themselves. Then one day, everything they've built feels like a cage. The same routine that once brought security now feels like suffocation. He doesn't know who he is without his role, his title, or his paycheck. And when that identity begins to crumble, panic rushes in. Some men respond by trying to reclaim their youth. They hit the gym, buy motorcycles, start dressing younger, chase validation in the eyes of women half their age. It's not always about lust. It's about feeling seen again, feeling powerful, desirable, relevant. The attention gives them a temporary escape from the mirror they've been avoiding, but it's a dangerous illusion, one that often leaves destruction in its wake, because no matter how fast you drive or how young you date, time always catches up, and when it does, it demands honesty. Other men withdraw. Instead, they become silent, irritable, disconnected. They sit in front of the TV, late into the night, not watching, but escaping. Their families feel them slipping away, but they can't explain why. It's not that they don't love their wives or kids. It's that they don't love themselves anymore. Every unspoken emotion turns into distance. Every suppressed desire turns into resentment, until one day, something breaks. An affair, a divorce, a sudden outburst that shocks everyone who thought he was fine. Philosophically, it's the classic crisis of meaning that thinkers like Viktor Frankl, Søren Kierkegaard, and Carl Jung spoke about. Jung believed that midlife isn't the beginning of decline, it's the beginning of individuation. It's when the mask of who you thought you were starts to fall, revealing the deeper, truer self beneath. But that process is painful, brutally so, because to find who you really are, you must first face everything you've avoided: the loneliness, the fear of failure, the realization that no one is coming to save you. For men over 40, this crisis often collides with biology. Testosterone levels drop, energy fades, physical strength declines. The body, once an ally, begins to betray. A man who once felt invincible now feels vulnerable, tired in ways that sleep can't fix. His mind, however, still remembers what it felt like to be 25. That mismatch creates an internal war between memory and reality. He wants to live like he used to, but his body reminds him that time is no longer on his side. And when a man refuses to accept that truth, he often makes reckless choices trying to fight it. But this chaos also hides a strange kind of opportunity, the chance for rebirth, because beneath the surface breakdown lies a deeper invitation to finally stop performing and start being, to stop proving and start understanding, to ask the hardest question a man can ask: who am I when no one needs me to be something? I think of another man I once knew, a father of 3, married for 20 years. One day, he quit his job, left his home, and disappeared for months. Everyone thought he'd gone mad. But when he returned, he said something I'll never forget: I had to lose everything to hear myself again. It's tragic, and yet there's truth in it. Sometimes men break not because they want to destroy, but because they've been silent too long. Society doesn't make it easy for men to talk about this. We teach boys to be strong, to endure, to never show fear. So when that emotional storm hits at 40, They have no language for it. They just act impulsively, destructively, because expressing pain feels like weakness, but silence is the real killer. It isolates, distorts, and eventually implodes. The philosopher Albert Camus once said, "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer." That's what midlife can be. A brutal winter that forces a man to dig deep enough to rediscover his summer. But to reach it, he must stop running from himself. He must stop trying to relive youth, and instead redefine what it means to live fully now. Not every man who goes through this crisis loses his family, but many do, because transformation rarely happens neatly. When one person begins to change, the balance in every relationship shifts. The wife who once knew his habits now feels like she's living with a stranger. The children sense tension in the air. Old wounds reopen. The family, built on his stability, begins to wobble as he questions everything. Yet here's the paradox again. Sometimes, the man who goes crazy is actually the one waking up. He's not insane. He's awakening from years of emotional numbness. The problem is that awakening often arrives too late. It collides with responsibilities, expectations, and the fragile trust of those he loves. And so, his journey of self-discovery becomes someone else's heartbreak. It's a tragedy repeated quietly in millions of homes. Men torn between the life they built and the life they lost within it. But beneath all the chaos, there's a deeper truth most never see. Every midlife breakdown is also a message. It says, you've outgrown who you were. Now become who you are. When I think about men over 40 who seem to lose their way, I don't see villains. I see men standing at a crossroads between who they were and who they might become. They're not broken, they're transforming. But like all transformations, it begins with destruction. Psychology tells us that every identity has a lifespan. The version of yourself you built in your 20s, hungry, ambitious, defined by what you achieve, cannot sustain you forever. Yet most men never learn how to let go of that version. They cling to it long after it stops serving them, and when reality begins to strip it away, it feels like dying. Not a physical death, but an ego death. The collapse of the story you've been telling yourself for decades. Carl Jung described midlife as the moment the persona cracks, the mask that we show to the world. Behind it lies the shadow, all the parts of ourselves we've denied or repressed. Our vulnerability, our fears, our unrealized passions. At 40, the shadow begins to surface, and if a man refuses to face it, it manifests in chaos. Affairs, addictions, emotional detachment, anger that seems to have no source. These are not random acts of madness. They are symptoms of an internal conflict between the life he's built and the life his soul still yearns for. Philosophically, it's the same crisis that Soren Kierkegaard called the sickness unto death, the despair of being unable to become oneself. When a man loses connection to his own authenticity, he starts searching for substitutes: power, attention, youth, control. But none of these fill the void, because the void isn't external, it's spiritual. It's the absence of meaning. I've met men who've achieved everything they ever wanted: wealth, recognition, a family who loves them. Yet when you look into their eyes, you see exhaustion, not from work, but from pretending. They've built entire lives around what others expected of them, not what they truly desired. And when the applause fades, they realize they've been living someone else's script. That realization can feel unbearable. At this stage, Some men turn toward philosophy, therapy, or faith. They begin to explore questions they once dismissed as too abstract. They start reading about purpose, about mortality, about what makes a life truly fulfilling. And slowly, the madness begins to make sense, because what they're experiencing isn't insanity. It's awakening, painful, disorienting, but deeply necessary. The world calls it a midlife crisis, but in truth, it's a midlife reckoning. The tragedy is that society rarely prepares men for this reckoning. We train them to achieve, not to reflect, to fix, not to feel, to protect others, but never themselves. So when emotional collapse arrives, it catches them defenseless. Women, on the other hand, are often more emotionally literate. They've been taught, even encouraged, to process feelings. Men, meanwhile, are taught to suppress them, and suppression always has a cost. This is why so many men break their families apart, not because they stop caring, but because they don't know how to express what's breaking inside. They turn inner conflict into external action. They run, not from their loved ones, but from their own reflection. They confuse freedom with escape, and by the time they realize the difference, it's often too late. Yet I've also seen men who embraced this crisis, who used it as fuel for transformation instead of destruction. They faced their shadows, they spoke honestly, cried openly, reconnected with their inner child, the one who once dreamed without fear. They didn't need to buy cars or chase youth to feel alive. They found meaning in simplicity, in conversations, in art, in quiet moments of gratitude. They rebuilt their families, not on control, but on understanding. What separates those who heal from those who fall apart is courage, the courage to sit in discomfort long enough to learn from it. Most men try to fix the pain instead of listening to it, but pain is a teacher. It tells you where your soul has been neglected. When I look at this from a philosophical lens, it becomes clear that the madness men experience after 40 is actually part of a natural cycle. Life, like nature, moves in seasons. The first half of life is about expansion, building, conquering, achieving. The second half is about contraction, understanding, simplifying, and seeking wisdom. But if a man tries to live his 40s with the energy of his 20s, he creates friction with the truth of time. That friction is what breaks him. The challenge is to see that breaking not as failure, but as metamorphosis, like a snake shedding its old skin, or a forest burning so it can regrow. Something must end for something else to begin. And if a man can surrender to that process, instead of resisting it, he becomes whole again, not the same as before, but deeper, wiser, freer. The philosopher Alan Watts once said that the meaning of life is just to be alive. Simple words, yet profoundly difficult for men who've been trained to measure worth through doing. When a man over 40 stops doing, he feels useless, but what he's really learning is how to be. That shift from external validation to internal peace is what saves him. And so, when we say men go crazy at 40, maybe we're misunderstanding the story. Maybe they're not losing their minds. Maybe they're losing their illusions. The illusion of endless youth, the illusion of control, the illusion that success equals happiness. Once those illusions shatter, what remains is truth. Raw, painful, liberating truth. But truth alone isn't enough. It has to be integrated. That's where healing begins. A man must learn to communicate his inner changes to his family, to let them in instead of shutting them out, He must learn to apologize for the ways he's hurt them during his confusion, and to rebuild trust through presence, not promises. That's what separates awakening from abandonment. In the end, midlife isn't a curse. It's a calling, an invitation to evolve. It's the point where life stops asking, "What have you achieved?" and starts asking, "Who have you become?" When I look back at the men I've known and the parts of myself I've lost and found along the way, I no longer see crazy. I see men at the edge of transformation. I see fathers, husbands, dreamers, builders, men who carried the weight of the world for decades, until one day their hearts demanded something different, not more, just real. The truth is, life after 40 isn't the end of something, it's the beginning of honesty. It's the moment when pretending no longer works, when silence becomes unbearable, when the soul demands to be heard, and yet it's also when most men are too afraid to speak. They fear judgment, failure, or disappointing the people who depend on them. So they implode quietly, breaking everything around them in their efforts to break free within. But it doesn't have to end that way. A man can face his storm without destroying his home. He can rediscover meaning without running from responsibility. He can rebuild, not by chasing youth, but by redefining strength. Because true strength isn't found in control, but in surrender. In the courage to say, "I don't know who I am right now, but I want to find out. With you, not without you." The families that survive these storms are the ones that learn how to listen, not just react. The wives who understand that their husbands aren't betraying them, but battling themselves. The children who grow up seeing their father not as a hero, but as a human, flawed, real, still learning. That's how generations heal, when one person chooses truth over image. Philosophers have always said that every breakdown is a doorway, and maybe that's the message hidden in this midlife chaos, that the only way to truly live is to die to who you once were, to let go of the armor that kept you safe, but silent, to allow yourself to become someone new, not because you failed, but because you've finally outgrown the lie of perfection. So if you're a man standing in that quiet war between your past and your future, pause. Don't run. Don't burn your life down trying to feel alive again. Instead, breathe, reflect, seek help, talk to someone, write, cry, walk into the discomfort until it turns into clarity. You're not broken. You're becoming. And if you're someone watching a man go through this, don't see madness, see the battle. See the boy inside the man who's just trying to come home to himself. Because maybe men over 40 don't go crazy. Maybe they finally wake up, and the pain you see is simply the sound of a soul remembering its own voice.